So the subject of this video is going to be really hard to describe. It's kind of about creative process. It's kind of about hard technical material differences in between mediums. Part of it though, I think, is just about an artist trying to figure out how to maintain progress and maintain a feeling of vitality in your own work when in fact, we have a kind of labor that can sometimes lead you to go on autopilot. So this is me breaking my own autopilot spell and trying to figure out how to translate the things I love about drawing into a medium that doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. Why you would like to be painting the way that you would draw. So essentially taking a wet, slippery, sticky medium like oil paint and trying to use it like you would a stick of charcoal. It's my contention really that painting and drawing, these things are really all happening in your mind. The material that you're using is somewhat irrelevant almost. Up to the point where, you could be a mixed media artist, you could be an artist who works exclusively in oil paint, you could be somebody who never paints at all, that only draws. And the same ideas about shadow shapes, light shapes, volume, form, depth, these things cross over the boundaries of mediums. And these are the ideas that I'm trying to use to kind of negotiate this barrier, this boundary in between these two materials. One of the reasons I started thinking about this was that the oil paintings that I was making, I felt like there were properties in my drawings that I wanted, but I could never really figure out exactly how to manifest them in oil paint. One of the first things I did in order to kind of create this situation for myself was actually to, in a way, remove color from the equation. So the painting that I'm doing, that I'm attempting in the best way that I can find to make like a drawing, I've used just a series of mixtures from one pigment and white. So a gradation, just like I would have a series of hardnesses of pencils. So I have one mixture that's rather dark, that's like my 6B, and I have one mixture that is almost white. So this is maybe my 2H. So in the higher key aspects, I'm going to be, creating these transitions using appropriate hardnesses of lead, or in this case, of course, appropriate mixtures of oil paint to manifest that. When you're drawing, you understand really, really well that in order to get really dark, rich values, especially with graphite, you need to build up slowly, right? You don't go in with your 6B and just mash in the darkest value that you can and then try to build out from there, because 6B value on a paper is going to be so inflexible. You can't really move that around a lot, right? Now, oil paint, you can move it around everywhere. You can wipe off the whole painting with a rag and come back to it and have a perfectly fresh canvas. But I wanted to use this particular kind of limitation that graphite has in the oil painting process. So what I did actually was to start out with a really compressed value scale, meaning that just like drawing on a paper that's maybe partially toned that I intend to use white chalk on, my first marks, I wouldn't be able to really elevate the brightest lights in the drawing very much. So I mimicked that with a mixture of oil paint. And also, by the way, I would have been drawing with my HB pencil or my H pencil. So the darkest mixture that I started the painting out with was something that I thought was just about at that level of sort of an HB even tone that I would have used in a drawing. And as I went through layers of the painting, I've then tried to expand a little bit, just like I would, shifting from an HB to a B pencil to get a little bit darker in the shadows, and then to a 2B to get even darker than that. And eventually at the very end, of course, getting into those accents where you've got your 6, your 8B, or your ivory pencil or whatever out that you're going to, not ivory, an ebony pencil out that you're going to use to like get your really, really darkest darks in there that are like these kind of accented, ambient occlusions underneath forms inside the shadow. When you're drawing, you have this blank white sheet of paper, and there's so much texture that you can develop, like with the side of a piece of charcoal, with the side of your pencil. You can have fine lines and misty, foggy elements. And I wanted to get a feeling for that also in oil paint, trying to use my brushes just like I would a pencil or a paper stump or an eraser for that matter. In addition to that, the other thing that I love about graphite is that you can kind of craft and hone really easily the shapes that you're kind of diving into, right? So let's say I'm designing this shape in the hair or in the ear or the shadow shape of the eye, and I find that maybe my line is a little bit too broad or too crude or something. I've got my kneaded eraser that I can go in and I can reshape. Now, with oil paint, that's going to be a little bit more challenging to remove that oil paint. But that's also something that I've tried to mimic as well by using actually a lot of Q-tips. It turns out that the absorbency of a Q-tip is a lot like the way an eraser affects graphite. So rather than working on my oil painting like I would with an oil painter's mentality of just, painting one clear refined layer after another clear refined layer, I'm treating it a lot more like graphite in the sense that I'll go in and design and work on one area, erasing away little parts that didn't work, but also in a way shifting my workflow to be a little bit more like drawing. I just mentioned a second ago that with oil paint, I have a very particular approach. I tend to paint in just about 3 layers. I have a solid underpainting, a first pass, usually in color, and then a final pass. That's my oil painting process. With drawings, you know that you can jump in and jump out anytime you want because they don't have that restriction, which is this window of drying time that oil paint has, right? For all you oil painters out there, you know that if you don't get it done in the 4 to 6 hours or whatever that you have to work that day, the next day the oil paint is going to be totally different. It's going to dry, it's going to be sticky, it's going to be sunken in. So you can't just open up the problems that you were solving. Again, you have to repaint in order to do that. Now with graphite drawings, you can dive in. I can draw for 5 minutes on the ear and I can walk away for 2 days and come back and pick it up exactly where I left off. Now, this kind of freedom is absolutely intoxicating in terms of being somebody who's a professional. A lot of us out there, we don't have, constantly 6-7 hours in a row to work on these projects. Drawing is great for me because I can jump in and jump out of it whenever I want to. So that's also something that, in a way, I've been very envious of, very jealous of in my oil paintings, that I want that ability to just jump in, do the work when I can, and depart and take care of the million other things that I have to do. But I found that really it's a mentality issue. If I go into the painting and I think about it just like I think about going into my graphite drawing, where I'm gonna spend the 15 minutes that I have and I'm gonna really focus and I'm gonna push this thing as far as I can in these 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna jump out, I find that you can do that. You just need to take that kind of right-hand turn in the way that you think about how you're approaching the material. If you're out there and you're watching this and you're a drawing and painting student, the big thing I want you to take away from this long, meandering, very abstract conversation is this: different materials can teach you different things. Learning to oil paint is going to change the way that you draw. Learning to draw is going to change the way that you oil paint. Sometimes, if you want to strengthen something that you're working on, if you want to get better as an oil painter, sometimes the answer actually is to study a lot better drawing, because the things that you dig up and that you find in there are going to kind of cross-pollinate, right, with your other processes. And this, for me, I've found to be true so many times over the years. Every time I jump into a new material, whether it's getting into gouache painting or actually getting into sculpture, all of the things that I learn across these boundaries of materials always come back to me when I work in the other one. The clearest example of this was when I was in my student days. I spent about a year and a half in the drawing program before I went into oil painting. After I went into oil painting for over a year, I went back and I did some charcoal drawings after that. Oil painting had completely changed the way that I approach drawing. It opened up possibilities and doors that I didn't even know existed. So if you're out there working on your projects and you're feeling like maybe you're stuck or you're stumped or you're having some difficulty experiencing advancement in your understanding of your practice as an artist, I think that giving yourself a little bit of time out from the materials that you always find yourself working in to experiment with something else before coming back, those vacations that you take into other materials, you will have picked up ideas in doing that you're then going to apply to your primary medium. Actually, that taking a hard left turn, right, into totally unexplored territory, a place where, you're like Bambi on ice, right? Like you can barely stand up before coming back. That's a way to kind of break out of a cycle where maybe you feel like you're just making the same result every single time. I can remember periods in my career where I would tend to be making like the same mistake or the same painting over and over again with the same dissatisfying result. And I think if someone had just taken me aside at that point and said, hey, why don't you jump into sculpture for a minute? why don't you try to sculpt a portrait before you go back to painting one? I think that would have been incredibly practical, partly because it would have kind of broken that spell, that slightly stagnant spell that you can get when you're constantly actually working in the same process all of the time. I mean, it's funny to say actually, because it's a creative career, that in fact, being a painter sometimes can be very monotonous. You go into the studio, you work long hours all day alone, probably listening to music or something, but just carving away, trying to get to your result. You can go on autopilot, so kind of shaking things up is really, really useful. And that's where this whole idea about, you know, cross-pollinating materials and mediums and trying to do with one thing what another one naturally does came to me. So thank you everybody so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to just hit that like button and subscribe if you want to get this kind of content on a regular basis. By the way, I am kind of curious as well what mediums you all out there are experimenting with. If you have a story that's similar to this one, please pop it down in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. And of course, as always, if you do want to learn more about drawing and painting, portraits especially, you can follow the link that's going to come up in a second to my Patreon page. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours of content there. Anyway, thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.